back there counting me down. 4, 3. So we're going to go with that. I'm going to need 3 readers this morning. We are in Nehemiah chapter 5, and I need 3 people that are willing to read some verses out of that. Grant, would you read in a moment verses 1 through 5? Verses 1 through 5 of Nehemiah chapter 5. I need another reader. I'm looking at you, Eric. Awesome. Eric, always willing to volunteer. 6 through 13. 6 through 13, Eric. And we need one more. Luke, you're going to close it out. 14 through 19. Before we begin, I've asked Brett Zignoni to lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll read those passages.
Our God and Father in heaven, we thank you so much, Father, for this opportunity to be here today as children, as part of your family. We love you, God, and we thank you so much for your church, and we thank you so much for one another. We're thankful for men like Dave Bird and David Posey and Grant Mulligan to teach, to bring forth your word from the book of Nehemiah. And this morning as we go through class, Father, we pray that we would run from those words, we would learn from Nehemiah's commitment to you and his godliness and his passion and his leadership. And we would take those lessons and apply them to our own life. Father, again, we love you. We listen our sins in Christ and pray.
Amen. All right, Grant.
Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money from the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards.
I became extremely angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After seriously considering the matter, I accused the nobles and officials, saying to them, each of you is charging his countrymen interest. So I called a large assembly against them and said, we have done our best to buy back our Jewish countrymen who were sold to foreigners. But now you sell your own countrymen and we have to buy them back. They remained silent and could not say a word. Then I said, what you are doing isn't right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and not invite the reproach of our foreign enemies? Even I, as well as my brothers and my servants, have been lending them money and grain. Please, let's stop charging this interest. Return their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses to them immediately, along with the percentage of the money, grain, new wine, and fresh oil that you have been assessing them. They responded, we will return these things and require nothing more from them. We will do as you say. So I summoned the priests and made everyone take an oath to do this. I also, is that it, Dave? 6 to 12?
Through 13.
13. I also shook the folds of my robe and said, may God likewise shake from his house and property everyone who doesn't keep the promise. May he be shaken out and have nothing. The whole assembly said, amen, and they praised the Lord, and the people did as they had promised.
Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors, who were before me, laid heavy burdens on the people, and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember, for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people.
All right. So when I was up here a few weeks ago and we were talking about Nehemiah chapter 3, we've introduced this whole book as a concept of being a good leader and good leadership. And I talked a little bit about that idea of, you know, if you got a leader, you got followers, and followers have to be good followers. And I was trying to identify some things that make you a good follower, a good teammate, somebody that can help the leader. And there's some things in this list that I think are going to come out in this story today. We're going to see some problems. Now, we're going to see how Nehemiah tackles this and how Nehemiah goes about this as a leader, and we want to pull that out. But there's some echoes of some of these ideas when it comes to being a good follower. So there are things like listening to the leader. Nehemiah is going to, as we just listened to, Nehemiah is going to speak to the people, and they need to listen. They need to pay attention, and they do. They do. They're good with that. There's focus on the mission that's involved here in that they're after one thing. They're trying to build these walls. That's the point of this. And yet there's all of these other distractions and all of these other things. And good followers, they focus on what has to be done and set aside some of the other things. Humility is a huge part of the lesson that's being taught here. And a lack of humility is a problem amongst the team or the followers in this particular case. Sacrifice, making sacrifices for each other when you're a part of a team is important, and we're seeing a lack of that, and Nehemiah is going to call that to account today. Being accountable and being responsible are also going to come up in this story today, and I think that that's important to keep in mind as we're talking about Nehemiah's challenge is trying to lead the people, and then thinking about the people and what their responsibility is to be a good follower. Okay, I saw that the questions went out late yesterday afternoon, not Richard's fault. I got them to him late Friday night, so he didn't see my email. And hopefully you got the questions that we're going to go through, had a chance to look at them and had a chance to think about them. But it's okay if you didn't, because I'm going to have every single question up here, and we're going to go through this. And Nehemiah chapter 5 is our topic for today and for Wednesday. And Dave is going to be leading class on Wednesday. So I briefly talked to him on last Wednesday and said, I'm going to try to get through the chapter and just talk about what's going on here and what's happening, and try to leave the application of what's happening here and how we can apply it to our lives to Dave on Wednesday. There's going to be some things that naturally we're going to want to already apply, and that's okay, but on Wednesday you'll get a chance to really dig into the application. My goal this morning is to make sure we understand what's happening at the time here, and then if we've got time at the very end, I'm gonna bring up a goofy little application that came to me on Friday as I was going about my business, and it just resonated with me and Nehemiah, so I'll warm you up for the Wednesday application part of this. Okay. Nehemiah's got a new problem. Seems like the more Nehemiah leads and the more Nehemiah gets into this, the more problems emerge. Describe the new problem that Nehemiah has to deal with in chapter 5. It's a new problem. So what's going on here? And it's arguably several problems that are all connected. How would you describe what's happening here in chapter 5 that Nehemiah has to deal with? Jerry.
Well, there's a lot of people coming together at Jerusalem to work, and apparently there's just, they don't have the infrastructure to take care of everyone, make sure everyone's got enough food. And then in addition to that, a lot of the nobles are taking advantage of a lot of the regular people, and basically the common people don't have enough to be able to pay their taxes, take care of themselves, etc. So those that are rich are lending them money, but taking it at interest, and they're having to sell their kids into slavery, mortgage their fields, etc., just to survive.
Okay, good. Add to that, Ed.
Well, it's summary of it, and that is they're complaining. There's a complaint, and that can be very disruptive when you're trying to do a project. And so it's interesting here how he responds to the complaints.
Yeah, I mean, one way to look at this is, as they're doing all of this work, a complaint comes forward, and that probably leads to the work stoppage, right? Like, we can't continue this while we've got this hanging over our heads. So there's a very practical part of this that Nehemiah has to get in and solve. And then Jerry brought up just the beginnings of, the first thing that's obvious is, I like how you said this, Jerry, like, as they're doing all of this work, they seem to lack the infrastructure to get all the food that's necessary to take care of all of these people that are doing all of the work. And then that starts to unpack some other problems, right? Some other things that are coming up. So what else is going on? Grant.
The problems that they are creating for each other, they also, in verse 3, says there's a famine going on.
Yeah.
And some of them are taking advantage of that.
Yeah. How is this different from, okay, so that famine thing is interesting because that's sort of a problem from the outside. They're not necessarily doing anything to create the famine. It's possible this idea of like infrastructure that with everybody arriving there and Nehemiah saying we're going to build the walls and everybody's going to build the walls, part of the famine may be caused by the fact that they just don't have time to be the great farmers that they once were. But it's also possible it's just a famine caused by natural events and a lack of water and all the other things that can create a famine. So we have a problem that's coming from the outside, but for the most part, this is a problem that they are creating themselves. And that's a contrast to what Grant talked about in chapter 4. In chapter 4, Nehemiah has to solve a problem from without. The problem is the enemies. The problem is the people that are harassing them. The problem is the people that are making their lives miserable while they're trying to do the work. And it's such an inspiring chapter. Like, it's so awesome how he pulls everybody together and how they got the sword in one hand and they got the tools in the other, and they just go at it. And it's just this great moment. And you want it to just end there. But you got to pick it up and keep reading, and you get to chapter 5. And chapter 5 is a problem that they're creating themselves. This is a self-inflicted problem for the most part that they're creating. Ed.
In the eyes of the law, in both Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, famine was a consequence of failure to keep the law. So here we have a famine that's congruent with them failing to keep the law. So a person reading Nehemiah who knew the law would say, they caused this themselves. This famine was caused by them bringing on this by not keeping the law of God. And so the wall of the law, the boundary between Israel and non-Israel, that law of the wall was being breached by the Israelites in violating that law, and that made possible this famine. It's very different than in our era where we don't have that Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 for us.
Yeah, okay, good. Roy.
They were having to mortgage their fields and their crops and even send their children into bondage, called enslaved, and their daughters had already been sent out. This is the only way they had of raising enough money to pay for the food.
Yeah.
So there was a lot happening. It impacted everybody. It made Nehemiah very angry, and I'm not sure he was aware of it until the complaints came about. It appears that way.
Yeah, it may have been he wasn't aware completely of what was going on. It'll be interesting what he says when he's trying to solve this, but this comes to him, and there's a few things in here that I thought were interesting. Number one, I thought this little piece about the people and the wives. The people and the wives. It mentions the wives are involved in this. And I don't know, I thought, why are we taking the time to say that? And I don't know, when I think people, I guess I thought it was going to be everybody. But he points out that the wives are involved. And by extension, the moms are involved. And if you've ever had any experience trying to deal with a situation where you got to deal with a mom related to her kids, Mama Bear does not like the cubs to be harassed. And I think you've got everybody, including the moms, angry about this situation, especially in light of the fact that it's impacting the kids. Children are not being fed, and then children are being put into this situation. This is like the ultimate issue here, I think, that they're losing their kids, to each other, to their brothers. So they talk about this being not something that the people outside are doing to us, we are doing this to ourselves. Within our own group, we're creating this. We are many, there's a famine. So there's definitely this issue that's prompting this, there's not enough food. So they start to try to solve the food thing, and they wind up having to mortgage their fields, their vineyards, their houses. They have to put those up against the need to borrow food from other people who have the food. On top of that, they've also had to borrow money for the king's tax. They still had to pay taxes. The king has taxes. They got to take care of that particular business. And if that's not taken care of, there's going to be a problem. So it's becoming oppressive for some people, and they have no choice eventually. In order to take care of all of this financially, all they have left for collateral, all they have left to pay off the debt is their children. We're forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And I thought that other little phrase in here, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved, was interesting. I don't know. Do you think, is that interesting in any way to you? Why do you think Nehemiah makes an extra call out about that? Why do you think Nehemiah adds to that? I mean, he said our sons and our daughters are going to be or are being forced into to become slaves. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved. Why does he add that? Why do you think he adds that? Roy.
Not just a future situation, it's already happened. I mean, I think that's just for emphasis that it's already occurred.
It's sort of like, look, it's imminent. Some of our kids are going to have to go to into slavery, and some of our daughters are already being enslaved. And I get curious about these things, so I go look up words. It's different words being used here. Our sons and our daughters are being forced to be slaves is this word ebed. And it means, we're not watering it down by saying, well, it's just servants. They're being forced to be servants with no compensation. They're being forced to be slaves. But then he says, and some of our daughters are forced into, and when that forced into bondage is a different word. It's kabas. And kabas has a tone of violence. Oppression. It is a slavery that is that has an element to it of severity and cruelty to it. So I think we can imagine that what's already happening here is what happens in any kind of enslavement situation. You can say you're going to start out and that it's going to be very gentle in how you handle this. But what's already happening is for some of the girls that are being forced into slavery, it's oppressive, it's violent, it's brutal, they're being taken advantage of. So I think that's the sense of what he's saying about how serious this is getting, and probably part of the reason why Nehemiah reacts the way he does. All right, I just got to hit this real quick. What's usury? Usury. Anybody look that up? Ed?
With interest, it's illegal, and in the law of Moses, you are not permitted to charge any interest against the poor whenever they were needy. And so that would be a violation of an interest law, i.e. usury. So it has to do with using people by using the money to go beyond what's permitted.
Yeah, you won't find it in the ESV. I just remember this when I was a kid, because everything was in the King James. And in the King James, they use this word, usury. And when I was a kid and I heard that, I was like, ooh, that sounds bad. And I don't know what it is about that word. Maybe it's because it got ooze in it, but it just sounds like a scary word. And it was all about, when we would look at the Old Testament, it was all about this usury. And if you look that up in the dictionary, you're going to find out it's lending money. The general sense of that today is lending money with an interest charged for its use, especially one that's exorbitant, right? That's excessive. That's oppressive. It's almost it's loan sharking. It's almost using the interest rate to kind of get eventually control of the person. In the Old Testament definitions of those words, you'll see it as mashah and nishek. It's interesting, to bite off is the root part of that. So it's taking a piece of somebody's stuff. But it really was just interest. It was kind of any interest that you would charge. And as Ed points out, that was wrong. Exodus 22:25 says, if thou lend money, this is all in the King James because it sounds better with usury. If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him an usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. Deuteronomy 23:19 through 20. I think this is the verse that shook me to my core when I was a kid. I didn't even know what it meant. It just sounded like, well, this is not good. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother. Usury of money, usury of victuals. What's victuals? It's just another way of saying food. I don't know why King James can't just say food, but victuals sounds worse, I guess. Usury of anything that's lent upon. Usury. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury. So this was a thing about not cool with the brothers, not cool with the nation of Israel, not cool with your kinsmen to do this. This was a bad thing. That the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to in the land, whether thou goest to possess it. And Psalm 15:5 is kind of a neat little psalm. 5 quick little verses that talk about some character that people should have. And it says, he that putteth not out his money to usury, nor taketh reward against the innocent, shall never be moved. If you have that attitude of I'm not going to do that to other people, I'm going to give because it's the right thing to do. Jesus hammers this concept when Jesus comes along and is talking about if people need something, ask for something, you give it and be willing to give more and don't expect anything in return. So that mindset has been lost here. And we find out that Nehemiah gets angry. That's the first thing it tells us. Nehemiah gets angry. I think in Eric's version, mine said very angry. What is it? The angry part, it said really got angry, excessively angry. Extremely, thank you. Nehemiah gets extremely angry. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for a leader? Extremely angry. Say that again?
It's necessary to show that he's wrong.
Okay.
Wrong.
Al said it's necessary in this situation to show that what they're doing is wrong. Okay? Ben?
Yeah, we see a pattern of anger being used when the innocent is being taken advantage of. We even see that in Jesus' example. The times he was angry was when people were being taken advantage of, and that's a good example for us too. You can see Nehemiah doing the same thing. It's not a selfish, my feelings are hurt, he's angry because his people are being taken advantage of.
Yeah, he gets angry because it is an expression against the innocent. If people are being taken advantage of, and he knows how bad that is, and if you just look up that idea of righteous anger, when I look it up, you won't find any other image than something connected to Jesus in the temple having righteous anger over the way they were treating God's house and going in there and turning over the tables and driving out the lenders and saying that is not the purpose of this. And the way in which not just God's house was being treated, but even people in that situation were being taken advantage of. So as a leader, there's, for Nehemiah, some justification to his being angry. I think one thing we learn about Nehemiah is that, and he's writing this, so he's willing to tell people, I got extremely angry. He's an emotional guy. Nehemiah's an emotional guy. Where else have we seen him show emotion so far in Nehemiah? Yeah, he was extremely upset and cried when he heard about the disrepair and the state of the city of Jerusalem. So his emotion is there, and as a leader, it's okay to be emotional, like Alice said, when it matters and when it's important. Now, you got to get control of those emotions, and I think we see Nehemiah about to do that. Paul says, be angry, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give a place to the devil. I think Nehemiah has some understanding that as angry as I am, I'm the leader in this situation, and I've got to channel that anger, and I've got to use that anger in an appropriate way, and I've got to do something about it. So it says Nehemiah took counsel with himself. Nehemiah took counsel with himself. After Jay makes a comment about anger, we're going to find out what you think this means. Jay?
I was just going to say that I think that a good outcome or realization about how well that anger was dealt and how it was done was by their response, so that the message got across. Because I think sometimes anger can cloud the entire message and it not be about the thing that we're talking about. It's about not ego or something like that, and it doesn't seem to be the case. Another example that I was thinking of when I read this was when Paul needed to talk to Peter and Barnabas and many others in Galatians chapter 2. And he talked to them to their face in front of everybody about this scenario where Peter had kind of got more aloof with the Gentiles. They were not doing it right. And Paul came in there, but he did it in a good way. He used God's word. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I'm so glad we have those examples biblically, because I think we all probably get in situations where we get angry about things. We get frustrated about things. And we know God's people do that. We know God's apostles did that. We know Jesus's appointed right-hand men did that. They had moments and frustrations in working with people and trying to do what they needed to do, but we see really good role models in how they handled that, right? Really good role models. And Paul does that with Peter. Nehemiah does that here in this situation. So it says he got angry, then he took counsel. He got angry, he took counsel. He got angry, he took counsel with himself. He took counsel with himself. What do you think that means, Terry?
I'm going to make a comment, but it will also address what it means. I think we have to be careful with anger, and I think we all would agree with that in the auditorium here. Also, I think it's a good question, is it okay to get angry for a leader to become angry? I think they should at least be stirred when something is against God's word, when something bad, such as oppression, that's what's going on here. When that's occurring, to at least be stirred. Anger can also be very dangerous, and that's why we don't let the sun go down upon it. But anger can at least be stirred. I mean, Eli and Samuel, Eli wasn't stirred. He was not upset that his sons were doing injustice. And God was very displeased with that.
Yeah.
It would have been better for him to have been angry with his sons and take counsel and do something about it. I just go to God's word. I think of taking counsel, Nehemiah could go to those passages. What's he going to charge the nobles with? He needs to go to the law. He's got to go to Deuteronomy 23 or 24, some of these passages that he cited. He's not going, oh, you make me very mad. No, this is what God's word teaches, so he's going to approach it that way.
Yeah, excellent example. And I think the taking counsel is setting up what he's going to do about it, right? And what's the right approach. And it's also, I think, that indication of getting control of some of that anger. Aaron, and then...
Yeah, I think oftentimes anger is just such, it's a reaction, and I think when it says that he took counsel with himself, he kind of gave himself a timeout and said, okay, what am I really angry about? And then the text tells us what was the result of him taking counsel with himself. He brought charges. He considered what his anger was about and figured out what that was so that he could respond appropriately. And I think that's obviously also something to learn with regard to leaders and anger, is that, taking that time to figure out what's the reason of your anger. Is it challenge to my authority, or is it, focused on others, some infraction against others?
Yeah, that's really good, Aaron. That idea of taking counsel, you can almost hear him taking a breath. Like he's going to take a big, deep breath here. He's going to think about this. Seth.
Same thing Aaron said. I mean, sometimes the tendency when we get angry is just to fly off the handle and explode. But it doesn't seem that he does that here. Like Aaron's saying, he takes the time to reflect on it, make sure his anger is valid, and think about the right way to handle it, and come up with a plan before just laying into these people.
Yeah. Hand right back there.
What we're both talking about is the difference between a reaction and an action.
Very good.
Just flying off the handle being angry, that's a reaction, that's bad. Taking the time to take counsel, deciding what to do, taking action, that's a leader, that's doing God's will.
I really like that. Yeah, I really like that. That's good. We react. I react. I say we. I should just talk about myself. I react quick. I can have a short fuse about some things, and you got to learn to find the right space between reacting and, to Terry's point, doing nothing. You got to take action, and we're going to see him. We're going to see him take some really solid action. I thought this was interesting. The word there, malak, is used like 350 times in the Old Testament. It's almost always used to describe royalty, becoming a king, sometimes becoming queen. Royalty, to reign is what it means, to reign, like reign. And this is the only time that that is translated to take counsel or advise. And I think what's being expressed there is that Nehemiah has some recognition that he's in charge here. He's the governor. He's the governor. There is no king for Israel. There's a king that he's dealing with and he's representing. And he is the one who's in charge of this situation. And I think it's saying he, in some sense, like he recognized this is my responsibility. I have to take control of this situation. I have to reign in some way. I have to assert myself in some way over this. I have to use the authority that I've been given to deal with this situation and act appropriately. But he's establishing himself in that role. He's recognizing the power and the gravity of the situation. And he's going to go reign, but he's going to do it in the right way. He's going to go do it in the right way. So let's talk about what he does. What does he do? We started to hit a few pieces of it, but the question that I think I set out is make a list of what Nehemiah does to address the problem in chapter 5. Is there any pattern in the process that Nehemiah uses to solve the problems that he generally faces? What's the way in which he approaches this? Luke, give us some of that.
So when I read that, I was immediately called to a picture of the year of Jubilee.
Okay.
He essentially goes through and says, cancel the debts, give stuff back, give people back, pay people a portion of what was done. And if you go read Leviticus 25, it's like, it's almost like his counsel with himself was, let's proclaim an maybe it's an out of sync one, we actually don't know. I don't think there's anywhere in the scriptures where they record a time where the year of Jubilee was done. It's interesting that it's there, it's supposed to be every 50th year, but we know they're around in many, many 50 years, but there's never a recorded time in like Samuel King's Chronicles where they say, and it was the year of Jubilee, so everyone did the thing. But this is about as close as you come to that. And all of a sudden he's give back land, give a portion of money with the land, let people go, and let's not do it again, or else I'll bring you out of an army if I can.
That's really good. And there's something you said there, Luke, that's important that I want to capture too. This idea of taking counsel with himself, I think, sounds like he's just talking to himself. But you can't see what he then goes and does and how many times he references the fear of God without recognizing that him going and taking counsel with himself, I think is, as has been his pattern, consulting with the mind of God, consulting with the Word of God, thinking about what is it that a godly person would do in this situation. I think he's applying that. Angie.
Yeah, I think that, I was going to say that as well. And that's his pattern. So you asked what his pattern is. His pattern is to take counsel, whether it be with God or written that it's with God. My thought is I think probably is also including prayer to God. And then he gets the people together, and then he gives them his speech, his tally-ho, and then he lays out the plan, and he says, now let's go do it. So he does that multiple times already, and we're only in chapter 5. And he seems to have quite a presence, because when he does these speeches, I think before I said, his halftime talk at one point, the people do what he said. Like they go, okay, he's right. Let's do it. So he has some sort of
credibility.
Yeah.
My dad said Riz. He has. I don't think that's it. But anyway.
Riz?
Yeah.
Is this like a young kid thing that I'm not aware of?
Not anymore, because the 70-year-olds have started to say it, so the kids are not saying it anymore. I can guarantee you.
Okay. I thought that was out of pocket for a second, but apparently that's not. That's my other little kid reference. Riz, okay. Angie, you're right. He is. He has a way of doing this. He has a pattern, and it's interesting. I think what's happening here is this is to Terry's point why you don't just go, look, they ought to know what to do. They'll figure it out. Because they don't know what to do, and they need someone to say it to them. When Nehemiah comes and says it, It's amazing how many times they're like, you know what, you're right. You're right, you're right. They just need to hear it. They need someone to lay it out for them, and you can't take that to chance, and you can't just assume they'll figure that out, right? Ben, you had a hand up? Aaron.
Part of that pattern that Angie just mentioned, when he brings the people together and starts his speech, he pretty much always starts with talking about God. Not, all right, everybody, here's what we're going to, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
He starts it with, God is with us. He starts it with when he's talking to the opposition, that God is with them, that God's going to do something for them. And
Right.
here again, same thing. He brings in, he appeals to their sort of sense of duty to God, basically.
Yeah. He doesn't start out with, I'm so angry, right? You've made me so mad, and I'm trying so hard to be the leader, and now you guys are frustrating me. He doesn't go there. He goes in a completely different way about that. Ben?
That's the hard thing. That's what he's doing when he's counseling with himself, is to figure out the right way to deal with this, which is figure out what is the right thing to do and then deal with it directly by going to these leaders and nobles, and then even going to the priests to maintain it, and then he goes to himself in the next check and his brothers to say, we're going to set the example with this. Because like what you just said, so often you see this so much in leadership. You see people start trying to incite anger amongst the people, like, hey, start murmuring, start spreading rumors, we got to do something about all these nobles. He could have taken that route with the people, but instead he's like, I'm going to do the right thing and deal directly with the issue, the people that are causing the problems.
Yeah, and the way he does it, Jay was kind of talking about this, like you can tell by the outcome that he did it the right way because the people respond appropriately. Roy and then Ed.
It was a two-step process, it appears to be. He brought charges against him, and then he spoke to him and told him what the charge was. And then he called a general assembly, which I assume means everybody, and made the charges to them a little more explicitly about historically bringing the Jews back as much as he could to Jerusalem, bringing their enslaved people back, and then, made a more formal charge at that time in front of the people. So it was a two-step process. He wanted to keep it transparent. He charged them, but he wanted to keep it transparent in front of all the people as to what he was doing to deal with this.
Right, and I think Angie alluded to this too. That's part of his pattern. He likes to get the people all together too. And sometimes he'll just start with the nobles or the leaders. Like when he took the little ride around the city and figured out how bad things were, called people together, and he called the larger group together, and he says, look, this is what we're facing, this is what we're dealing with. Ed.
Yeah, problem solving usually starts with looking at the needs and looking at the resources. Here he goes to the scriptures, and he clearly sees, okay, we got a serious problem because we've got a violation of the law. So he calls those nobles, as Roy said, that's exactly right. But then when he gets everybody together, this isn't just a random talk. The reason he has credibility is he starts with context. He says, here's the context. A bunch of us have given up everything so that we could actually have this thing happen. And folks can come back here. And so here he is. He's given up being a cupbearer of the king. That's kind of transparent. He doesn't say that that's it. He says some of us. He links himself together with other people who are in this positive project. And that does have an impact of shaping these people. It didn't work for Jesus as well as it works for Nehemiah. So it's not always how well we do it that's shown by the impact. But nevertheless, what he does then is he gives the problem solving. He says, here's the situation. Now, not everybody's acting like this. There's a problem. And he articulates what he has observed. Not just what he heard, but what he has observed. He's thought about this. And having credibility involves articulating what is seen in a way where everybody there can say, yeah, that's what's happening. And even the nobles could see that was happening, but he'd given them a heads up that this is where this is going before he pulled everybody together. And so giving people a heads up, looking at the needs, looking at the resources, he then says, here's what needs to be done. And so that isn't just accidental, it isn't riz at all. It has to do with his very careful calculation and the manner in which he uses problem solving with them. And this can be done in any setting. It's done in schools, in jobs, in politics. Whenever a problem is really solved, This is how it's solved.
Yeah, I can't tell if it's Riz or not because I don't know what Riz is. I'm going to find out. Here's how I captured it. And maybe this helps with some application for Wednesday, because, you know, there's this what he's laying out here, I think, is applicable if you're leading the family. It's applicable if you're on the job. It's applicable if you're dealing with challenges within the church or out in the community. He took counsel with himself, very clear and plain about the problem. Like, he laid it out. Here's the situation. He does not beat around the bush about this. He says, here's the problem. He's always kind of putting that thing out there first. He brought the people together. He reasoned with them. He got reasonable about it. He didn't yell and scream. He didn't go off on them. He got reasonable, and he explained it in a reasonable way that, look, this is what you're doing, and this is the problem that it's creating. He makes a judgment in here. He makes a judgment. And, you know, we talk a lot about not judging other people, but that's not applicable when you're the leader responsible for the people. And like Terry was pointing out earlier, you are stirred about something and you know it has to be done. I think that judgment is, he says, what you're doing is not good. What you're doing is not good. This is not a good thing. And he's very clear about that. He appealed to their relationship with God. He appealed to their relationship with God, and he said, he made that comment, that argument about fearing God was, you know, you're doing this and the problem outside is watching. All those people that we were in chapter 4 dealing with, and we're here to be God's people, and they're kind of laughing at us about, oh, God's people, look at the state of your city. They're watching how we're treating one another. They're going to use that against us. We say we fear God, we got to show them how much we fear God about this. He humbled himself to the problem. He has that comment in there about, you know, I and my brothers are a part of this too. Like, I don't know if he knew how bad it was getting and where things were leading, but that's not going to be unusual that the leader doesn't have all the details of what's going on. But as he's becoming aware, he's like, hey, I'm part of that group that's like, you know, lending and loaning, and we got to stop that too. He makes himself part of that. I thought that was a really important part of this. He proposes a solution. He doesn't say, go figure it out. He says, this is what has to happen. And I like how Luke talked about, kind of references that Jubilee and says, we're going to do it this way, right? He got a commitment out of them, and he left them with the warning. He left them with the warning with that, shaking things out about their lack of fear of God. Okay. This part about he puts his money where his mouth is, I think it goes into, maybe you can talk about this a little bit more on Wednesday night, but he says, you know, I could have taken advantage of a lot of things throughout all of this, and I have not. We've tried to be good examples as leaders for how we think that you should all react to this stuff, and maybe that part about lording it over the people is something that you guys can I have a little question on there about lording it over people, and maybe that's something to explore. All right, I'm going to go into my goofy little thing in the time I've got, because this just hit me. What was Friday? Friday was a major and significant celebrated holiday in the United States of America. It's Groundhog Day. Are you familiar with this movie? So I read an article on Friday about Groundhog Day. This movie is 30 years old now. I remember when it came out and watched it. I watched it. And I don't think I got it. I just thought, it's Bill Murray and it's funny and it'll be funny. Are you familiar with like how this movie has become like a significant and major conversation in religious circles, circles of ethics? They use this to teach classes because this movie is all about this guy who feels like he's above everybody and feels like he's superior. He's very cynical. He's very jaded about life. He looks at life as though it's meaningless. He looks down on these people in this little town, calls them hicks, says that they're just silly and this whole thing is stupid and why does this community come to do this? And then he gets stuck in a loop on Groundhog Day that he cannot get out of. And he's going to repeat the day every single day. 34 times in the movie he repeats it. The script called for him to be stuck in that for 10,000 years. He's just stuck in this nightmare. And it starts out with this mentality of, well, there's no meaning to life then, and there's no accountability, and there's no responsibility. And if I'm just going to repeat the same day every day, I'm just going to be as awful as I want to be. I'm going to be as terrible as I want to be to people. I'm not going to really care. There's nothing keeping me accountable. And he does that until eventually that becomes very dissatisfying. And he comes to himself, and he kind of takes counsel with himself, and he kind of thinks about what the meaning of life is all about, and he comes to the conclusion that he should treat people better, that he should be a better human being to other people. And I'm reading this on Friday, and I've been studying this is my excuse for not getting the questions out. I'm studying Nehemiah, and I'm just hearing these people that have forgotten about their community. They've forgotten about their brothers and sisters. They have said, hey, if you can get over on people, get over on people. If you can't, go ahead, Dave. If you can take advantage of people, that's just all part of it. Like, I don't really have to worry about the other people. That's different. That's just business. And I think that movie, I'm going to have to go back and watch it. Like, it's trying to send a message that, no, there is a purpose in life. And that purpose that comes up in that movie, I think, captures a little bit of what Nehemiah is doing here, in that he's saying, like, God has a purpose for us. And what God cares about in times of crisis, and what God cares about when everything's good, is that we take care of one another, we love our brothers and sisters, we work with them, we're all in it together, and there's some compassion and some concern for each other. So, it's rated PG. It's actually very clean. If you've never seen it, go enjoy the movie Groundhog Day. All right, thank you.